Do you have
page
your
up.
browser open?
I do. I'm going to watch and see if it pops up
Okay.
on my. And if I'm looking away, it's like I got 4 computers here, so it could.
Click here anytime to see.
Yep, we're up. We're up.
Hey. Okay.
It's
Great.
working. We got the dual screen, so we're good.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome.
Hmm.
And then my phone decides to ring here, so so I have to shut that off. Awesome. Okay, I want to make sure I haven't seen us yet, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, go ahead. We're good.
Okay.
Hey, if you're out there, this is casual.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, let us know, people, if you can see us. Oh, I hear an echo. Okay. How come I hear an echo?
Do you have another browser open or something like that? That's what I usually get when there's an echo.
Oh, if you're playing it? Well, it's.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just shut it off and then I'll see comments as they come in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's sometimes what happens.
Okay. All right. So I don't see any comments yet. So people, let us know if you're there and say hello.
Hello out there if you're watching.
Hello, everybody. So I know I feel like I'm going at this blind. So, all right. So everybody, this is Marcia from Be Provided Conservation Radio with Beth Pratt. So I'm excited to be talking to Beth today about P22 and any other animals that she's worked with in her 25-year career. 30?
You know,
30?
I hate to say 30. I just turned 51, and that I can say I've been doing anything for 30 years is a little scary.
I think that's great. So it's all been in the wildlife realm, right? Your professional?
Environment and wildlife. I started out actually getting, and it was more sustainability. I was my first job out of college was an environmental manager for a big manufacturing company in Stockton, California. And it's sort of been in increasing degrees more and more into wildlife, which has always been what I've wanted to do. Much like I think, I graduated in the job market in 1991, for those of you who remember that time, which was a recession. So
Yeah.
we were, whatever job we could get to pay the rent was, so my wildlife had to come as as conditions changed, but, I'm in the dream job of, for me now. So, the journey got me here.
Yeah, well, I read that you worked with Al Gore didn't you work on a project or a workshop with Al Gore or some
So,
training?
boy, talk about a gift. So I got selected to be part of the Climate Reality Leadership Program, which is you get to spend a day with Al Gore and get just totally immersed and trained into how to talk about climate change. And wow, I mean, and listen, he, whatever your politics are, he is in genius mode, and he literally talked for most of that day. So for like 6, of the 10 hours was up on stage, literally relating the science, how he talked about climate change. It was just an incredible experience to learn from him, on that. And listen, I don't know how Al Gore these days isn't like, told you so. I mean, all the stuff that he and the scientists that he, utilized for his information, it's all their predictions is coming true. That's why science is awesome, and we should be following it. Current situation, as we were talking about, the science will lead us through this. And as we talked about, we are very happy to be in a state of California where science is leading us through this to the other side. So
yeah, thank goodness. Yeah. So now you're the executive. I get your title right. You're the California Regional Executive Director for the Wildlife Federation, National Wildlife Federation.
Yeah, I mean, cougar lady, right? I mean, it sounds like a big title, but, I'm also licking envelopes and, whatever it takes to save these cats. But yeah, it's the National Wildlife Federation is one of the oldest and largest conservation groups. I think we have like 6 million supporters nationwide. Ranger Rick, most people probably know National Wildlife from Ranger Rick. I grew up reading it. So it's on to to work for an organization that helped shape me into wanting to protect wildlife. But there's I think it's 6. We've changed sometimes. 6 regions nationwide, and there's a regional executive director for each region. So there's 5 more of me. I'm the only region that's just one state, but I'm the biggest region because it's California. We have 40 million people here, and I can't think of a better place to do conservation work in. California really has some of the most, not the most, has the most and best protections for wildlife, I think, in the country. So it's a great state to do wildlife, and the people too here just love their wildlife.
Yeah. So speaking of, I think you came in with some good news today. About the vote yesterday. Can you tell us about that, about the ESA vote and what's going on with that? So.
Yeah, case in point, right? I mean, again, we have some of the best protections for wildlife here in the country, if not on the planet. And wow, I mean, you just think California can't up the bar, but it does, right? I mean, we just raised the bar in the stratosphere. So really big shout out to first the Center for Biological Diversity and the Mountain Lion Foundation, who petitioned the California Fish and Game Commission to at least see if these threatened populations, so not all mountain lions in California, but these threatened populations that are way too fragmented in these urban areas and losing genetic diversity would be warranted for listing under the state, not the federal, but the State Endangered Species Act. And so the way the process works, they petition California, the Department of California Department of Fish and Wildlife, led by the awesome director Chuck Bonham, then has to have 90 days to take a look at it. And if they think the science, it has to be the science, warrants further consideration, they then kick it back to Fish and Game saying, yes, we think it warrants further consideration, which they did. Okay. And the Fish and Game Commission then has to vote on whether they agree.
Okay.
And they did. It was a riveting meeting, at least if you follow ESA or mountain lion science. And full of lots of public comment. And I got chills at the end. The commission, all 5, voted to unanimous to that. It then gets into the year-long review to see if it warrants final listing. But some of the protections kick in right away for these mountain lions, which is good news. And we can talk about some of the issues they face later. But the conservation significance of this is I can't underscore it enough, even for progressive California. You're talking about mountain lions being an endangered species, or at least these populations, not little frogs that have a small area, right? What you're basically saying is you're considering enacting protections for about a third for land habitat, about a third of California, which is analogous to protecting all of New England, right? For for an animal. Big area. And on top of that, this isn't a frog or sage grouse. This is a mountain lion, right? Where most areas seek to rid yourself of them, at least other states. Here, we let one live in LA and are considering protections. So this is significant. And it's also significant because these cats aren't going to remain on the landscape if we don't do something. And all these commissioners recognize that we don't want to lose this piece of our wild heritage. My dog is on Squeaky Toy.
He's happy with the vote too.
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like the meanie, but sweetie, when we're on, you can't have Squeaky Toy when we're on. She actually was doing that during the Fish and Game Commission. Luckily, I was on mute. So this is significant, but it just but it's not out of left field. Again, California is the only state in the country where special protections exist for mountain lions. You can't hunt them for sport. Yeah. Indeed. And in P56, the situation that happened. I can't even. So much has happened in March. I don't even. Time is meaningless. But I think it was a couple.
Shot, right?
He was shot legally. I will add, under the current state law, if a mountain lion does prey on your livestock or pets, you do have the right to shoot that animal. But I think we were heartbroken over his death, but I think what it did, which was good, is really had people all the way up to the governor take a look at, wait a minute, there's some loopholes in this law we need to fix, because P56 was part of one of these threatened populations. He was only one of two known males. And you take one out, you're now putting that population, like, you may be game over. That other male gets hit by a car. We are now in critical points. So for the sake of a few goats, and not that I'm downplaying people who have livestock or animals, but there needs to be some precedence given to native wildlife, especially these threatened populations. Indeed, when we know that coexistence is possible. I mean, right now not right now, but before, under the current law, you could literally tie a goat to a tree, which would kind of be baiting.
Yeah,
kind of. You'd still have the legal right to shoot. Really? There was in the current law that called for that you had to kind of take some protections. That did change a couple of years. Was it a year ago? Was it where, at least in the Santa Monica Mountains and Santa Ana's two threatened population, California Fish and Wildlife had to at least, you had to prove you were doing something, sort of a 3 strikes. But even then, it wasn't like rigor, and you could sort of try to do a few things. So I think this is really going to come about. It's not that you can't have livestock, and it's not that we want mountain lions to be eating livestock or pets. But I have to say, as someone, I don't have livestock, but I have 5 dogs and 2 cats. I take measures to protect. For me, it's the native wildlife, and there are measures. And, NWF, we put our money where our mouth is. When a mountain lion was P45, some might remember, was the woman had taken out a depredation permit. Mountain Lion Foundation, the National Park Service went and tried to educate her. We donated $2,500 for her to build an enclosure. And so, there's ways we can coexist on the landscape. It's not, it takes some responsibility on our part, and it does take some financial commitment. But I think, nonprofits especially, and even the government agencies, we are here to help. I mean, the last resort should be killing an animal, in my mind, whether it's a species that's threatened or not. So anyway, wow, we are celebrating today. I'm just huge. Yeah, it's a huge, to me, beyond that, we're these mountain lions, if we don't do something, will disappear. It's just a huge statement, too, that we are clearly on the side of native wildlife here. I think if my take is, we're in their homes, right? I mean, we are, and we should accommodate that. If you're someone who doesn't want to live with wildlife, there are places you can move where you will not have to, deal with them. Exactly. Now, if your livelihood, like if you're a cattle rancher, then we need to find ways that your business doesn't get disrupted. But there are programs for that, again, that don't have to resort in lethal take,
Exactly. Yeah, you read about the livestock guarding dogs, all, things to help protect the livestock.
And there are people like Kelly Hendricks, she testified yesterday. She's a rancher that, she takes precautions and loves having wildlife on the landscape. And I think the thing to note is, agriculture can be such a part of the solution, because, we don't want those ranches to go to condo development. I mean, it's a much, and a lot of them are good partners, and there's a lot of people like Kelly doing things to help mitigate depredation or loss from wildlife. So it is possible. We're here to help, I think, is what the conservation groups want to say. Let's just use that take as an absolute last resort, and in some respects, especially with these threatened populations, it may be something that is not an option for a while, that, there's more responsibility on until we get these populations stabilized, right?
Right. So this brings to mind like a question, like you hear of somebody, it is, does a cat have to be shot or eliminated if it's like attacking somebody in a park somewhere? I've heard several stories of, children, luckily they were able to get away, but they still went out and shot the cat. And, they were always juvenile cats. It seemed like, they're just doing their thing. But yeah, that's really
It's a
sad.
good question. And listen, I have my own personal views. I mean, my own personal view, if I'm out hiking in Yosemite or Yellowstone where I lived or let's say a grizzly or a mountain lion takes me out, I've always told my parents, do not let them kill the, I mean,
Yeah.
if I was in their territory and, but listen, I sympathize with the government agencies as much as, I'm very much more on the spectrum of animal rights and animals have a right to live. On the other hand, if you are a government agency managing public safety, people are going to sue you if you don't do something. And I think that, and also public tolerance. I do think if you do have a cat that, for some reason is attacking people, and it's rare, as we know, it is extremely rare. And as you noted, a lot of these are, not all, but a lot of these are juveniles who don't quite have it down yet.
Feeling it out.
Yeah, and they don't quite know, what, listen, if we were really on the menu and I just had this, talk of mountain lions, we'd all be dead. I mean, they are stealth hunters, right? But we're not. We are clearly not. In California, just alone, over 100 years with over 40 million people, there's been less than 20 attacks and only 6 of those have been deaths. Now, listen, it is tragic when someone's killed and we don't want that to happen, but we take risks every day with our lives, and you need to put the mountain lion risk in perspective. What Justin Dellinger, the CDFW biologist, was on, he's like, you have more chance getting hit by an asteroid, than getting.
Exactly.
So it's put it in perspective. But on the, should wildlife be killed for attacking people? I have my own view, but I will say if you put yourself in the the position of people managing public safety, it makes sense. They have to ensure that public safety is paramount and that that they're not going to get sued or held liable for these parks. So I think in some respects it does help us keep these animals on the landscape, that there is that out. Having said that, is it always is there any evidence that if, a mountain lion, and I mean attack, not just sighting a mountain lion, or a bear bites a person, does that mean he'll do it again? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that there's scientific evidence leading to that. But on the other hand, you definitely want to err on the side of caution if you're in, the public trust position. So, yeah.
Is there any way to? I'm kind of getting off topic a little bit, but yeah, I guess it's all about cougars and mountain lions.
Yeah.
So just like, is there a way to track these and relocate them somewhere, or are mountain lions difficult to relocate?
Yeah, the relocating wildlife, especially wildlife like mountain lions and bears, it rarely works, especially if you have I don't even want to use the word problem, because usually these problems are created by us, okay? I worked in Yosemite for a decade, and one of the first things I worked on was the Keep Bears Wild program. Mm-hmm. So Yosemite, as we know, had terrible problems with bears breaking into cars and, causing property damage. No attacks, interestingly enough. There's never, the only death, boy, I'm sorry, we're getting some cool thunderclouds. My house is really cool. We don't get that as often as I'd like. The only person that's ever died by wildlife in Yosemite has been from a deer, right? And I will say, overall, that tracks in the state of California. There's, I don't think there's been a death, or if ever in recorded history, or at least in the last 100 years. We have really chill bears. They're more after our food than us, right? And plus, they're black bears. We don't have grizzlies here anymore, sadly. But so once, it was really interesting. Once the park, what they were having to do for the longest time, they were having, almost $750,000 in property damage. Bears knew how to break into cars. They're going into the trash bins. But when they really flipped the switch, it was not a bear problem. It was a human problem. What did they do? They put responsibility on us. You couldn't leave food in your car. You had to store it. the incidence went way down, right? But what they were doing before that is relocating bears. In fact, some of the bears, black bears that live in the Angeles National Forest came from the 50s from the bears in Yosemite that were, being at least in our term bad, but they were just bears really. So relocation doesn't work. You just either put the problem somewhere else or they try to come back. Mountain lions, same thing. So,
their territory's huge, isn't it? So and
there's no open space. I mean, the thing is, people ask, like, why don't you relocate a, like P-22 and put them somewhere where there's more room? Well, there's no open mountain lion space. There's no open bear space. You plop, a mountain lion somewhere else. There's a dominant male there who's already eked out the territory. So you're introducing conflict somewhere else, and likely resulting in the death of that animal or an animal. Think about it. It's the same with us. If tomorrow, Marsha, I took you and plop you down 100 miles away, you're going to be stressed. You don't know the situation. You don't have food. It increases the potential for conflict. So relocation is usually not a good option. Now there's a difference between relocation and like what they will do, like when a mountain lion in its own territory comes into a neighborhood, and that in itself is not unusual. And, CFW, and rightly so, you get a call, there's a mountain lion in my backyard. Well, cool. Mountain lions just being in a human space is not cause for concern. But if a mountain lion's a little too, or appears like it can't get out, or, is near a school, they'll relocate it, but to within its own territory. They're not going to take it hundreds of miles away. So that's where it is often a difficult choice for these wildlife agencies. And the other thing they get asked, well, why don't you put a problem animal in a sanctuary? Well, an adult mountain lion is not going to do well in a sanctuary. If younger cats, like kittens that are abandoned, yes, but you plop a 5-year-old mountain lion in a sanctuary, that is a tough go for an animal that's been wild a long time. It's not that it doesn't happen, but that's still tough too. So there's not a lot of good options. You're often having to choose between tough choices and no ideal options. So I sympathize. Again, I have my own personal views on this, but I sympathize with the choices these wildlife managers have to make day to day, balancing wildlife well-being and public safety and public support for wildlife. I mean, that's the other thing we need to keep in mind is that, minimizing attacks, and conflict is going to help keep that public support up for wildlife. Not everybody is like us who are like rah rah, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, getting back to like when we were talking about the ESA vote, you mentioned that if we don't do something now, we're going to lose mountain lion. How long, if nothing was done, how long would we have, or how long would they have?
It's obviously we can't predict exactly, but the National Park Service scientists, who I am just so fortunate to be working with on this project, they've done rigorous. In fact, the Santa Monica Mountains population, probably next to the Florida Panther, is the most studied mountain lion population probably in the world. So we have really good data. Yeah. And, the Park Service has been doing this research now since 2002. So we have some long-term data too. And again, we wouldn't even know these cats were in trouble or that we needed a wildlife crossing if it wasn't for their research. So again, science is awesome. Lead with the science, right? But so what they're finding by doing some modeling, first of all, that the Santa Monica mountain cats, which are isolated, south of the 101, they have, based on the genetic decline right now that they're seeing, right? So again, they're inbreeding. They're breeding with their daughters and their great-granddaughters and their great-great-granddaughters, right? And based on some of the other mortality factors there, so not just the genetic decline, like, getting hit by a car or rodenticides, they have it best if we don't do something 50 years. And so that, that sounds like a long time, but it really isn't, especially when, we could have increased mortality events. We could have 4 mountain lions taken out by rodenticides, and, you can't predict an uptick in that with some of the threats these urban cats faces, that like cats who live up near where I live, although I'm in LA a lot, not days, but because we're all staying home.
To our listener, she's near Yosemite right now.
Yeah, I'm coming to from the southwest entrance of outside of Yosemite, but obviously LA is kind of a second home. But the cats up where I live face some of this, but not to the extent these cats face. So they have at best 50 years. And then if they start showing birth defects, like the Florida Panthers, right? We have the Florida Panther case to really watch. Those guys were literally next to, like, the next step was on their way out. They were showing birth defects like kink tails, one testes, so they couldn't even breed, right? So they had to bring in some again, Panthers is another name for mountain lion. Yeah. They had to bring in some Panthers from Texas to bring in some stock. So they've at least gotten the population up, but they haven't solved the connection. Their cats are still getting hit by cars and not able to. So we have about 50 years at best, and then if they start showing birth defects, that's like 10 to 15 years time horizon. So, and you're only talking about in this area, 10, maybe 12, maybe 15 cats, and so it's not a lot. And, so yeah, this is not a long time horizon, which is why, something like the ESA affords some protections, even though, again, it's still not finalized. Some of those protections kick in right away, which helps us manage the situation better until we do get solutions in place, like the wildlife crossing, like banning rodenticides, things like that.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about, I want to talk about a lot of things with you if we have enough time.
Sure, yeah.
Especially like P22. I want to talk about P22's situation as well. And I'm sure everybody knows who P22 is in California, but maybe there's some people who don't know.
Better.
It's like the most famous mountain lion here. So if you don't know, P22 is lives in Griffith Park, which is a small park. Well, it's kind of a large park for LA, but it's not as big as like his natural range would be, correct? Right. And so it's a very urban park, but you can probably describe it better. But how did you get introduced to P22?
Yeah, the P22 story is a good one, and it's why I don't sleep anymore working on this project. But I had actually I just started my job with the National Wildlife Federation, so I just come back from Yellowstone. I had always kept my home here because although Yellowstone was a dream to work in, California is always going to be home, even though I'm originally from Boston. But I'm
I was going to ask that. Good. Yeah.
Californian by choice. After I came out here after college, and it was just like, yeah, I'm never leaving. But I just come back from Yellowstone, and one of the first things I was doing on my job was writing a book about California wildlife. And the book it turned out to be, which you have when mountain lions are neighbors, is very different. Yeah, there it is. There's P22 on the cover.
That's P22 with Hollywood.
There it is.
Yep.
Our boy. But the book it started out to be, which was just kind of a general survey of California wildlife. There's actually not an updated book on that. It was very different than the book it turned out to be, which was really getting into this sort of urban coexistence, or at least wildlife coexistence with people. But
I love that. Yeah.
And he's the one who really, he changed everything for me, not just the book, like the focus of my work. Before that, I had worked primarily in national parks, Yellowstone, Yosemite, and was continuing to do that with this job. I was starting to work on some projects in these more typical wilderness areas. But I read about him in the LA Times, the P22. In fact, he wasn't even called P22 in this article. It was Mountain Lion Found in Griffith Park. Yeah. And like any good snobbish Northern Californian, I had been to LA maybe half a dozen times. I didn't even know where Griffith Park was. I just assumed LA was all, concrete. And so I actually didn't believe it. The term fake, there's my dogs. Yep. I knew that would happen. The term fake news wasn't a term at the time, but I certainly would have used it. I was like, there is no way a mountain lion's living in LA. It has to be fake. So, I actually got in touch with Jeff Sikich, who was named in the article. He's the, he's one of the lead scientists on the project, and he's just an amazing guy. He's become a friend, him and his wife and their daughter, who I love. But at the time didn't know him, and I'm sure he was like, who's this crazy woman calling me? But he was so gracious, took me out for the day, took me to Griffith Park, but also to the greatest. I hadn't even, I think I had driven through I don't even think I had driven one-on-one through the Santa Monica Mountains. Maybe when I 20 years ago when I first came to California. But I was just so blown away. We were walking around Griffith Park, and I outlined this in the TEDx talk I did. I had this like a life-changing epiphany, because at first I was like, oh my God, this cat needs to get out of here. There's like people everywhere, and
Cars and
they're cycling in cars and playing golf, and there's pony rides and a merry-go-round. But he's telling me about the challenges P22 faced to get here, crossing 2 freeways, and about all the Santa Monica mountain cats and what their study had shown that, they were hanging on by a thread, but they were doing it. And it occurred to me like, okay, well, what other option does P22 have? I mean, it's either this or death. So who am I to really judge whether he can live here? So why can't he live here? Like, that's my hang up, not his. He's saying it's okay. So, so at the end of the day, I turned to Jeff. I'm like, I'm just so inspired. Like, I'm just starting my work with the National Wildlife Federation. Is there anything I can help you with to further this research? And he's like, well, there's this little wildlife crossing we've been trying to get built. And so there you have it. It changed the book. It changed, the focus of my work, conservation work with the National Wildlife Federation. So yeah, that's how I got.
So are you concentrating more on urban type, like that coexistence with, and the crossing, you have a site where you can look at what the crossing is about as well. It's called hashtag Save LA Cougars, right?
Website, right? www. Actually, if you Google hashtag Save LA Cougars, it gets you there too. But www Save LA Cougars. Yeah, it really did. It influenced my strategy here in California. In fact, we were just putting together a strategic plan for the work we would do in California because I was still new at my job, and it shifted to almost entirely urban. And we did also, we had this great advisory board for California where I invited all these people, from business people to scientists to sort of further that strategy. And Jeff actually attended some of those meetings. And we really switched to this sort of connectivity in these urban settings from a couple angles. One is connectivity from a purely biological and ecological perspective. So that's building the wildlife crossing, but not just crossings. That's also like butterfly corridors throughout cities. Like, how can we, because to me, and I am such a convert since, and the science is showing this too, that the model I grew up in, the North American model of conservation, which I was taught in when I went to school, you put aside a Yosemite, you put aside a wildlife refuge, these little islands, check, you save wildlife. Scientifically isn't valid anymore. No. You still need those. I am not at all advocating. We want spaces like that where wildlife sort of reigns supreme. On the other hand, we now know that large landscape connectivity, even for small animals, is necessary. And we also know that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be vast tracts of open space. And if you give wildlife a little help in cities, like planting, the appropriate milkweed, or opening up little corridors like P22 was able to use, right? That is just as vital and impactful. So our approach really is twofold. One, to look at connectivity through a biological perspective, but I'm also going to add it's also to look at connectivity through a social perspective and how people connect to wildlife in these urban areas. And I think that's also what, the work we've been doing around P22 is, to me, just as important as building a crossing. People are connecting to wildlife in ways, especially using P22, that is going to produce lifelong advocates for wildlife, whether it be writing a hip hop song for wildlife, whether it, or for P22, whether it be, kids writing letters to P22 or building wildlife crossings in their classroom. He's become kind of this folk hero, which is such a great entry point. We have people giving to our cause who have never given to an environmental cause before.
Wow,
and it's because there's this way we've approached it, not like a typical conservation campaign. Listen, we just said the science is paramount. We lead with the science. If the science didn't tell us to build a wildlife crossing, we're not going to build it. On the other hand, the science doesn't save animal species. As we know, it saves it because we know how to, but if the public will isn't there, it doesn't matter. We have plenty of species that have gone extinct despite reams of scientific papers telling us how not to. It's capturing that public imagination and will. That's the storytelling side. And that's what, that connection point we focus on also with our work. How do you connect people to wildlife in ways that are meaningful? And that's been just as for me, rewarding is the actual, again, building a crossing.
Wow, yeah, that's quite a feat. So P-22, how is he doing? He's been there for how long, do you think? A couple
So,
questions there, I guess.
we, pretty much assumed those first camera photos of him was about when he arrived there. That was 2012. So he's been there since then. Like you said, he's in a territory, he's doing something. Here's my little mountain lion. This is Huxley. He likes to be in the map. Huxley is 20 years old.
Oh my goodness. Oh,
yeah. Great. And indeed, a fun fact I learned recently. I didn't know this, I guess. I should have, even with, my biology background and studying mountain lions. But I was just interviewing Jim Williams on my live show. And
P-22 Presents, yeah.
Yeah, in his book, I was rereading it just, last night, or at least I'd read it when it came out. But mountain lions are more closely related to house cats than African lions. I think that's such a great fun fact. Anyway, but he's my little mountain lion.
They also have a cheetah component, don't they? A genetic relationship to cheetah?
Well, they were I'm not sure how, all cat, you got Panthera and then Felis, right? So,
so they're going to have...
So I'm terrible at family trees, but yes, mountain lions did at least used to coexist here on this continent with cheetahs before the last ice age. But oh God, what was the question you had asked?
I had like a double loaded. Like, how is P-22 doing? How old is he?
He's in a smaller territory than he should be. Yeah. But perhaps not surprisingly, because he crossed 2 freeways to get there. He's been there since 2012. He really hasn't made much of a move to leave, but I'm sure in his mind he's like, oh my God, I'm not going to cross those freeways again. And indeed, as we know from the study, most cats don't make it, right?
No, one just died a couple of years ago, right?
Actually, God, was it last? The P-61 was, had actually crossed the 405, but then met the dominant male that was hanging out there. He wasn't collared, and literally they caught this on camera, on security cameras. Oh, wow. That male chased him back. So P-61 at that point had two options: fight the dominant male or try to get back across the 405, and he chose the 405 and got hit, sadly. But it just shows you again the challenges these urban cats face, and that's the challenge P-22 is sorry, this is a third I think the third live I've done today. So
but yeah, try to pop a picture of P-22.
What cat am I talking about? We were talking about Patagonia cats on the last one and Florida panthers. So yeah, I'm on this. But so P-22, that's the choice I think he has made, which is that, listen, I'm surrounded by freeways. I'm probably not going to get lucky like I did before, right? So this place is cool. There's plenty of prey. And indeed, that's what these territory sizes are defined by, is prey density, right? So cats where there's a lot of deer may have a smaller territory, where cats who have a shortage of deer may have broader territories. For the most part, for a male, it's about 100 to 200 square miles. So he's in 8 square miles, right?
Oh, yeah.
So far, he's got plenty of food, so that's probably why he's hung around. But yes, it would be better if he didn't live full-time in Griffith Park but could rove, right? But of course, that's impossible with the freeways that are surrounding him. So, but he's doing good. In fact, we just had Jeff on the P-22 Presents. He's getting up there for a mountain lion.
So he'll always be a bachelor then, huh? So he doesn't have a mate that's wandered over yet. So.
No, and it's unlikely. Females don't tend to wander as much as males. There is that unnamed cat that chased P-61. He's hanging around in between the 405 and the 101 if you look on a map, and hasn't crossed the 101 yet, which would lead him to Griffith Park. I mean, there's really no other green space there, which would be interesting because, 2 males in Griffith Park. Yeah, that would introduce some very interesting dilemmas, I think, for wildlife managers. But yeah, I mean, I never say never with wildlife. They always do things that astound us and is outside of our comprehension. I mean, P-22 even showing up there. But yeah, it's unlikely he's ever going to have a mate just because of that. But I think he's. Some of us have come to terms with bachelorhood, and it's not all that bad. I will tell you this though, which does make me a little sad. Miguel Ordiana, who helped discover the first photo of P22, and hi Miguel, if you're watching. They have cameras, and the Park Service has cameras, but a lot of these cameras now come with sound. I mean, these wildlife cameras are getting good. Miguel has footage of him that he captured, and I'm sure he's continuing to capture. But I remember when this first came up like a year or two ago, of P22 making noise. Now, mountain lions are extremely quiet. They are ghost cats, but except for when they're mating. My God, it sounds like people are being murdered. So, but he caught P22 on camera making the sound for mountain lion, which is a lot like mountain lions make, again, they're quiet, but if you have a house cat, again, related, like my cat will do that clicking noise when they see birds or something. So P22 was making a really a sound that was, hey, is anybody out there? So he hasn't given up, So, I think that's, he hasn't given up yet, but boy, it must be, being the last year kind. And even mountain lions who are not social, they live alone. Yeah. They fight to the death over territory. They are very much a love him and leave him species. P22 really just wants a date for a couple days and then whatever he's set for a while, right? But still, even then, he's putting out signals like, hey, anybody answering my call? So, but otherwise he's healthy. Again, he is getting up there, but,
so you don't know how old he is exactly?
Well, they guess just from, when he got into Griffith Park, and obviously the things they can tell, like teeth, and they think, God, 2012 years too. He's almost 10, 9 or 10. Mountain lions in the wild, you're talking like 10 to 13. But here's my, and I think a lot of people, he's in the wild, but he's not totally in the wild for a mountain lion. So one of the main stressors on male mountain lions especially is fighting territory. Right. And indeed, the reason P22 is still so handsome and pretty, you look at mountain lions, photos of mountain lions his age in other places, even the rest of the Santa Monica Mountains, they're all craggly and scarred like a tomcat because they've been having to defend their territory, right? But doesn't have that stress.
That's good.
So he may live a little longer. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting. He also has some threats that, like rat poison. He suffered that one.
That up. Didn't he, like in 2014? I have a picture of him. Can I show a screenshot of him from the Urban Carnivore site with him with mange?
Yes, exactly. So, he does have threats like that, which, it's hard to tell. He could suffer it again. And that's why, part of this California ESA listing is that, they would have to look at having these sorts of things in areas where, if they are listed as endangered. Groups like Poison Free Malibu. Oh, I see zebras. Zebras are good.
So I'm sorry, I've never used this before for that. But yeah, can you see that's P22 there with...
There you go. You got it.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah.
Look at him.
He had mange, the poor guy.
Like majestic cat he should be. So, he got exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides, which are horrible. Like, just stop using them. And again, that's why groups like Poison Free Malibu, who are doing awesome work, and like Assembly Member Richard Bloom, who's, introduced some bills and trying to get passed to ban these things. He got exposed to it, and these are horrible deaths when you die for it. You basically bleed internally. But what they also do, the mange is kind of a secondary, condition of that, where their immune system, usually, mange is nothing new and animals suffer from it, but they usually can throw it off, because their immune systems are healthy. But these poisons weaken, immune systems so much that, P22 is really suffering from it. So luckily he's monitored, right? So they caught him on film looking bad. The Park Service caught him, was able to treat him for it. But he could get exposed again. There's nothing, rats are still prevalent. But otherwise though, he's looking healthy. He's doing good. We just caught him, this couple, we posted it on his page. Literally was, like their dining room. He was using their backyard or side yard to travel every night for, because these mountain lions will go back to a kill for a few nights in a row.
Yeah.
And they just kept seeing P-22 walk through their yard. And one night, literally, they got their camera and he just turned and looked at them. And they got this great photo of him just,
awesome.
hey, how's it going? And then walking through their yard. But he gets picked up on Ring cameras a lot. And but it just shows you he's figured out. I mean, he's a cat that has proven to be extremely adaptable to urban living. I would say that not all cats. I mean, mountain lions and all wildlife, we tend to think of them as groups and instinctual, but they're not. They're individuals. And P-22 has a personality. He's got a pretty chill personality, if you ask me. Other cats may not have stayed. Other cats may not have made that journey. And other cats may have gotten into some conflict by now, but he's really an adaptable urban cat. I mean, he's figured it out, and mountain lions are usually, a lot of them not so tolerant to people, and he's figured out how to kind of keep to himself and make the occasional splash, whether it be munching on a koala or taking a nap in somebody's crawl space. But other than that, he's pretty chill cat.
Yeah, I was worried when I heard about the koala. I'm like, oh no, are they going to go after P-22? But So why the P-22 name? What is that? Why?
So P stands for Puma, and this is one of the things that's kind of fun about mountain lions. They have I think one of the records for names and of regional names across the world for what they are. So Florida panther, same thing as a mountain lion, right? It's panther, puma, catamount, whatever you want to call it, mountain lion. So P stands for Puma, and he was the 22nd cat collared in the National Park Service study. They're now up to 80, so
nice.
Pretty cool. And someone posted, I think it was Randy in the Santa Monica's the 101 freeway.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. and 15. Yeah, Randy, you're right. The 15 is just as, in fact, Dr. Winston Vickers, I just talked to on my P-22 Presents, and it's the same thing, right? And indeed, this ESA listing, if you Google or read the staff report, you can go to the California Fish and Wildlife Commission site and read the staff report on the ESA listing. There's a great map that they put together that's part of actually this larger, or not that the Fish and Game Commission put together, but that's in there, that shows the genetic clusters, for lack of a better word, or in California. And like where I live in the Sierra, plenty of genetic diversity and a huge, territory. But you look at the Santa Anas, the Santa Monicas, the, sort of those coastal ranges, they're small, isolated populations that, again, the genetic diversity is declining. So you're right. It's not just the Santa Monicas. And that's why this ESA listing is pretty much the Central Coast South, right? So, because these are populations that are highly fragmented and indeed are just, again, declining from inbreeding. So, yeah, thank you for posting that article on there.
Yeah, thank you. And Randy also asked, did you hear about the incident in Aptos with the mountain lion there? I think there was a mountain lion that was, I think Randy, we're talking about the mountain lion that was on somebody's property.
Mm-hmm.
He looked pretty thin, actually.
I don't know I get so many of these. There was one Aptos one, but it wasn't like, how recent was this? Was this
2 weeks ago, maybe?
I don't know if I saw that one.
Yeah,
I guess
that one looked pretty thin when I saw it. I was worried it was kind of sick when they posted the picture of it, but they were going to have somebody come out. It was in somebody's yard, I believe, if that's the one he's talking about.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. But, that's usually, these, especially these mountain lions that get into our areas. Again, it's nothing new. They've traveled through our areas forever. It's just that we have cameras. But when you do get one looking thin, or especially younger kittens, some of them could be orphaned. Some could just have gotten in a place they can't navigate. Like, they might be getting in a neighborhood and then like, oh God, what do I do? Right. They just could be sick, so I don't know about that one, but those are situations where, again, if not, relocation and that they're going to bring it to a whole nother territory, at least, California Department of Fish and Wildlife will come out and at least look at the animal and perhaps get it back to a little more wilder place in that area where they can recover. Or if it is sick, obviously they have to make some hard choices about can it be treated or not. But yeah, I don't know about that case, but that is what happens. So. Mm-hmm.
We just lost one yesterday, unfortunately, on Highway 17. I don't know if you heard about that.
I saw. Yeah,
that was sad. So
it's it's what happens. I've started. We had a mountain lion that got hit by a car up near me, and I went out and took a look at the it was dead, and sat with it for a while because it's one thing to say they get hit. It's another thing to look at it. And this is the reality. And I've started showing that picture. I'm usually not someone who wants to show a lot of graphic photos, but I think it's really important to know the reality of what we're talking about. And these are magnificent, beautiful, wild creatures, and they are reduced to this bloody mess on the side of a road because, we're not doing what we should and taking measures to help them travel safely. And again, it's not just mountain lions. One of my favorite photos I've ever taken is on that P22 hike I do every year. I caught a little lizard on Mulholland on like the curb, looking to try to see if they can.
You're like, no.
No, don't go. Roadkill to me in general is just devastating. We take for granted now people get hit by cars, obviously, but not on all on the scale animals do. And we take for granted, like we walk through our world in relative safety. I mean, again, I say relative, obviously there's threats, but look at our world through an animal's eyes. And this is why I love doing this P22 hike I do every year, which is basically retracing his route, how he got to Griffith Park. If you look at your world, our human world, through an animal's eye, there is danger at every step. I mean, just imagine walking out your door and trying to get to the grocery store with danger at every step, right? We don't have that, right? We get in the car, we go to, these guys, just to live, are facing danger from our human, obviously they face danger from predation, but that's natural danger. I'm talking about, a mountain lion trying to get somewhere. There's a dog barking at them. There's a car. There's rat poison. There's a fence. It is at every turn that any of these animals are alive in our landscape, just as a testament to their resiliency. I don't think us humans would survive that test of like every second, having to overcome a different thing that will kill you. That is not what you've evolved to respond to, right? We could ask, well, why can't deer figure out cars? Well, hello, deer or their relatives have been around for millions of years, and cars are what, the last, 80 years? Of course, they have not evolved to have to respond to them yet. At some point they will, but it is a new thing for them. They're evolved to, when they see bright lights, flee, or, we take for granted and I've been thinking about this, sorry to wax on, but in terms of this pandemic, this challenging time we're finding ourselves in, where our lives and our security seem like to turn on a dime overnight. Not that we ever had it, but at least we had the perception of it, right? I mean, losing jobs, losing life, unexpectedly. I mean, obviously that's the world of wildlife. That's what they live every second of their lives. Like I think about there's a lot of tree cutting going on around me because of fire danger. And some of it's kind of an overreaction. You're a bird who's made this beautiful nest, and bam, your tree goes down. Your whole life, your life
season is done.
So, I think that we have this illusion. We are animals, and we have this illusion of security, and that really doesn't exist. And I think the pandemic's been a big wake up that we're not immune to those, those big changes that seem like it comes out of nowhere. But that's I think the wild world. Not to minimize it at all. I mean, people, and some more so than others, are dying and suffering. But that is sort of an animal's life, right? That is what they are living, especially in our human spaces. Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Put ourselves, in their shoes for a little bit.
Yeah. Put yourself in an animal's shoes, and
Yeah.
this becomes a lot more, a lot more context. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think, I hear a lot of stories about wildlife getting a break, with us not being, I'm sure they are getting a break. Have you noticed anything by you that has changed or anything in your world,
Yeah, again, this is a scientific experiment nobody wanted to conduct in some respects, because obviously at the bottom of it or at the top of it is a lot of human suffering.
Right,
But
right.
it has been interesting watching, and I think at this point it's all anecdotal. But on the other hand, we are going to have some data coming out of this, because we do have a lot of these animals collared, and not just in this, but everywhere, right? I mean, anybody who's doing a scientific study right now that has GPS or is tracking animals otherwise, we're going to get some data on what happens when human activity, goes to an absolute minimum. This has never happened before. I think
I would love to
anecdotally,
see that.
yeah, anecdotally, a few things are happening that we're already seeing, and some of this is predictable. Like Yosemite is getting a lot of press. The wildlife's kind of taken over. Everybody's out of the valley, and they're have at it, right? And we sort of saw that before with the government shutdown, right? There was a period where the park was shut down to people. The bears did start using like the Ahwahnee outside bar area. So you are seeing wildlife move in ways that are different. There was just this great video of a coyote on a beach right near the Golden Gate. Oh my God. Again, there's usually people on that beach.
Yeah.
It's not that the wildlife weren't in these areas. They just used these areas differently because of our human activity. So I think that's more what's going on. But there's no doubt that more wildlife could move into these areas. I was interviewed by this, I think it's Street, oh God, I'm sorry, I'm apologizing. What was the blog? Street Smart or something in the Bay Area. He was wondering, like, all of a sudden he was hearing bird song and in his house in the city. And again, I don't know that it's so much that more birds were moving in, but noise pollution.
Yeah.
You hear it. And animals are sensitive to noise and light pollution and all that. So, at least to the Santa Monica cats that, as part of this project I work on, I know the National Park Service is watching their movements, because yes, the freeways, it's not no traffic, and LA freeways, even with the minimal traffic, are still pretty
high
big.
traffic.
On the other hand, okay, some of these cats may, or other wildlife may chance it. So yes, I think that wildlife are moving differently. They are sensing what we're doing. What the ultimate, sort of result of that will be, we'll see. I'd say one thing that, occurs to me is what happens when activity ramps back up. So if you're like a mountain lion that says, hey, I'm going to go here where I usually haven't, and then activity ramps back up and you're outside your usual territory, what happens then, right? Or these animals making homes, like some animal had made a home. I forget where this was. I mean, there's just been so much good social media, like a bird's nest on a car window. Like what happens when the person needs to use their car again, right? So I think it is going to be interesting, especially when the human activity ramps back up. But you know what? It's been fascinating to watch. I just wish it didn't have to come on the, with so much human suffering, because I'd be more cheering it on if it wasn't, this sort of human suffering element, because let's let them have a break from us humans. I mean, my goodness, we have dominated and shoved them to the margins for so long. So, again, I'd be a lot gladder about it if it wasn't a pandemic, impacting people.
Yeah, all of us for sure. Yeah, and I agree. But I know we're running long. We're close to an hour. So, but I know in your book, in this book here, you outline a lot of things that we can do to bring nature into our world. Little things that make a big difference. I don't know if you want to just kind of plug that a little bit in some of your research. What stood out when you did this? This is a really good book, everyone. You should read it.
Oh, thanks. And research
I learned a lot. Yeah.
It was the most fun part because, again, I got to really, get to know a lot of the scientists and environmental advocates around the state, some of who have remained long-term friends. But I think, the gist of the book, and obviously P-22 is the cover, and but it's not just about mountain lions. He's the first chapter. It really is about these amazing stories of wildlife, really being resilient and adapting to us, and us adapting to wildlife in ways that I think are just so inspiring and shows what is possible. I mean, again, the old view was, wildlife should be here and people should be here and never the two should meet. But I think we're really turning that on its head, especially in California. You got like the Facebook foxes were on the back cover, like, the Facebook campus, instead of getting rid of them, they're like, well, can we keep them? Like, let's, and they do coexist quite well.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's for me, and it's chock full of stories like that. Like, how are people in wildlife challenging these preconceptions of how we can live together? Which to me is not just fun stories. It's going to have to happen because wildlife. Wildlife's running out of space.
Yeah.
It's the number one threat to wildlife worldwide is loss of habitat. So. We don't have any more open space, really to put aside. And we're, in absent a change in human nature, we're not going to stop building. So, how do we share our space? Because wildlife has proven that, hey, they don't need perfect nature all the time. I mean, we want it where we can get it. So it's really our hang up. So hopefully these stories will inspire people. And again, I think the takeaway from my book is you don't have to be building a wildlife crossing or stuff. You can share your space even if you just have all you have is an apartment balcony. Just put out some native plants, put out a bird bath, put out a hanging, hanging bird feeder, or hanging plant garden. You will have made a pretty big difference for wildlife. So
that's great. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I don't see any more questions. I don't know if anybody out there has any more questions. It looks like Christine Cook
hi,
your book.
Yeah. Hi, Christine. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah.
She said thanks for all you do. I don't know if you can see her comment or not, but yeah. So, but yeah, is there anything else you want to talk? There's like a million things I could talk to you about, but I know you've done like 3 interviews today. You did the vote yesterday, and
talk as much as you want. Yeah. I mean, it's never. I never get tired talking about wildlife. I'd say 2 more things. The book, I don't get any royalties, so if you buy it, the money goes all back to the wildlife projects like the crossing. I'd say the other animal we didn't touch on, and we don't have time to get into it, but the other story to me that's just as awesome as P-22 in this state, at least, is we have wolves now and California. And I would just like to note, if you don't know OR7, he was this up there with P-22, made an incredible journey and sort of paved the way. He was the first wolf to step in California in 90 years, although he went back to Oregon to raise his family, much like most Californians do. But it is likely that he has passed on, was just announced. So, for me, it's like mourning this great public figure that passed. He was a pretty remarkable wolf. He lived to age 11, which is very old for a wolf. Wolves are like 5, 6 is pushing it.
Wow.
So just like to acknowledge another great story in this state is that wolves have come back. And indeed, I hope to, if current patterns hold with the way they're traveling, I may hear wolves howl in 5 to 10 years in my home. And I think, the largest story of all this is that the wildlife are here, but also that the people in California are strongly on wildlife's side and want wolves and want mountain lions and want wildlife on our landscape for the large part. So that to me is the story, that we are a state that, while not doing everything perfectly, really sides with native wildlife and tries to coexist. So.
Yeah, that's one thing that makes me hopeful living here for sure. And I think people are willing to be educated on all of this. People are becoming more and more aware with stories like P-22 and OR7. I think there's a movie coming out, isn't there, about OR7? They got a stand-in wolf. They found a wolf.
Oh, it's actually it came out. In
Yeah.
fact, that
Is it already out?
yeah. In fact, the filmmaker, oh God, Clemens. What's his last name?
I know. I
can't.
just researched. I didn't write it down. I forgot.
It's in my book actually,
Yeah.
and no, he did this a while ago, and he went out and auditioned,
Yeah.
Wolf. It's a great movie, and oh God, or is it? Yeah, it's in my book, or The Journey, I think it's called.
Yeah, I think that's where I learned about it. I didn't
Yeah,
know it was a movie already. So
yeah, it's a
yeah.
movie, and he passed away last year, which is sad because he was
Aw.
such a great advocate for wolves, and it was fun, yeah, because he kind of retraces the journey with the stand-in wolf. Obviously, we don't have a lot of film footage of OR7, so check it out. I don't know if you can buy it. I'm pretty sure.
That's OR7 there.
That is OR7. Yeah, there he is, our boy, our hero.
He's beautiful.
But yeah, it is a good movie. I really enjoyed it, and he captured sort of the journey this wolf had to make to sort of eke out his own territory. He was sort of a trailblazer.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
we have wolves in California because of OR7. So
That's wonderful. So
yeah, he sort of started the wolf highway from Oregon to California.
nice. Did you work on wolves when you were in Yellowstone, or did you?
So I didn't work on them in that I was a researcher, but as we talked about before, Doug Smith became a friend. I wrote a lot about them and worked on advocacy and education. And Doug, who is one of my heroes, always, he was just so gracious. Anytime I wanted to do a story on wolves, would be gracious to make time for me. And I was really lucky. I got to spend a 3-day field course with Doug. He's just an amazing human being.
Yeah.
But so, wasn't a researcher, but that I got to live with wolves for 4 years. I mean, hearing wolves howl, being out on a trail, or, I'm kind of an off trail person myself, and seeing a wolf or hearing a wolf howl, there's something about that makes the wildness complete. It's hard to describe unless you've been out here and heard that howl or seen that wolf. Wolves do have a presence that I would say is different than any other wild animal I've encountered. And I've seen, I've been out in the middle of nowhere and had a grizzly bear, encounter or encounters, many of them. So, and others, I've seen mountain lions. I've seen just about anything in the wild, at least on this continent, that you can see. Not a wolverine though. So I would love to. There's something about a wolf encounter I can't quite, put my finger on that gets at that true. It's like they're the soul of the wilderness. So,
the way they look at you. Yeah.
I'm happy for Californians. You're gonna have that chance to hear a wolf howl and have that same. I've heard wilderness. So yeah, it's amazing to live among wolves.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, me. Yeah, we're here.
I hope we get a chance to hear it too. So, yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And Christine also mentioned Meatball. I don't know if you want to mention the huge bear.
Not about Meatball. So Meatball the bear, a lot of you probably know him. He was a bear that lived in Glendale, and he got a little too accustomed to human food. The reason he has the name Meatball is because he broke into somebody's, I think, outside freezer or garage freezer and ate a whole bag of Costco meatballs. But, and that shows he was just getting way too accustomed to human food. But in one of those, a success story, even though what they ended up having to do was they actually tried to relocate him, didn't work, and then he was just getting into too much trouble. Again, it was a human problem, but he was eating too much. They actually ended up relocating him to lions, tigers, and bears. You can go on and see updated photos of him. But the city of Glendale, and again, a success story, saying we don't want to be the cause of that again. We're going to do better. So they really stepped up their wildlife coexistence efforts, so much so that I forget what year it was, but I think a picture of it's in the book, or I mention it in the book. They created a Rose Bowl parade float on coexisting with wildlife, in the center of it was Meatball in his garbage can, because there's that famous photo of him. If you Google Meatball the bear, the first photo that come up will be this photo of him in a garbage can with, although I actually think that's from the sanctuary, but on the other hand, it's still the famous photo. But they pledged to do better, and that's the real success story here, is that that's not going to happen again. You're not going to get another bear, at least in Glendale, who's going to have that opportunity to be that accustomed to human food. So yeah, Meatball's a favorite, mainly because he showed people the error of their ways. I have to say, if any bear is going to like captivity, it's probably Meatball. Yeah. He was a big guy who just liked to eat and nap.
It's just like, feed me, I'm okay, I don't need to wander.
The other last say, I know we're over time, but about Meatball, which is Google this one too. I'm pretty sure it's Meatball, but there's that famous footage. I think some helicopters were following Meatball one day. He was on his travels through a neighborhood, and we're talking rural living. This bear was walking down sidewalks. And this guy, like, you picture like a corner. This guy was texting, so he wasn't looking up. He's on his phone, and the helicopters captured this whole thing. He's walking, Meatball's walking, and bam, the guy, like, there's a bear there. And like, Meatball goes, the guy goes. I mean, it was great footage on why you shouldn't always be on your cell phone. So
I need to Google that.
That is hilarious footage. And again, it just shows you an urban bear. There was no, wasn't really a threat. The bear went his way. It was just a surprise moment for him.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, I like hearing success stories like that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Meatball, from the standpoint of an animal, it would have been better for him to be wild. But again, he's living out his days at least, alive, and the city of Glendale is doing better. So it's awesome.
Yep. It brings more awareness. Children are going to learn, the younger generations and such. But yeah. Awesome. So, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah. Great to talk with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's really nice to meet you. I hope everybody's safe and healthy in your realm and everything with this pandemic too. So.
Yep, right back at you. Yeah. And then we'll have to meet up in person once we can. So.
I love that. Yeah.
Cool.
I enjoyed talking to you. It's like so many questions come up. I really enjoy your P22 presents. I hope you keep those going if you have the energy to do so.
I do it. As long as we're going to be at stay at home, we're going to try to connect people around wildlife, much like you're doing. I think it's something that, again, it brings us together in this time. So yeah, we're going to keep doing them until we can't. So sounds
awesome. Good. Well, good. That's good news. Well, good luck with everything, and you can go eat after your long day.
All this week has been 3:00 lunches, so awesome. Anyway,
so thanks for all you do.
So I was like, Highway 140 is closed. I guess we're predicting, as I was telling you, some thunderclouds are forming. It looks like we're going to get downpours. So anyway, I'm glad we got this in before the power went out with lightning storms. So.
Well, good luck with that. Enjoy the thunderstorm.
I want to say one last thing. Yeah. Your painting came out wonderful. It's just so great to gaze at it the whole time. So thanks for putting that up. Did a great job.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. My first mountain lion painting. So
anyway, all right. Take care.
Take care, Beth. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Stay healthy.